All right, so Henry VIII, six wives, right? Everyone knows the rhyme.
Yeah, he's definitely famous for that, isn't he?
But you've brought some Wikipedia excerpts on him today, and apparently there's more to this Tudor king than just the wives, huh?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the wives are a huge part of the story for sure, but to really understand Henry, we need to go deeper. It's about power, religion, this larger than life personality that really shaped England as we know it.
All right, so let's dig in then. What kind of stuff are we talking about here? Give us the inside scoop.
Well, I think it's fascinating how Henry's early years really set the stage for everything that came later. You see, those early experiences really planted the seeds of his ambition, but also some deep-seated insecurities that kind of echo throughout his reign.
Okay, so paint a picture for us. What was young Henry's life actually like? How did it shape the king he'd become?
Well, just imagine this. Henry's the second son, right?
Okay.
So he's not even supposed to inherit the throne.
Right.
But then his older brother, Arthur, dies.
Oh, right.
And suddenly, young Henry, he's thrust into the spotlight. All those expectations, the weight of the Tudor dynasty, the future of England, all resting on his shoulders.
Wow. Yeah, I can't even imagine. Talk about pressure. Did they even let him play outside, or was it all Latin diplomacy from day one?
His education was, it was far from typical, let's put it that way. Fluent in Latin and French, a skilled musician. This wasn't just about, preparing for kingship. It was about molding him into this ideal Renaissance prince.
The Renaissance man. Okay, so fast forward now. It's 1509. Henry 17, barely old enough to, grow a beard, and boom, he's king.
17 years old.
What were those early years on the throne like for him?
Well, you've got to remember, he was young, he was energetic, and definitely eager to prove himself.
Right.
There's this image of him as this athletic, almost romantic figure.
Right, correct.
But he was also ruthless when it came to consolidating his power. This is a time of courtly intrigue, alliances constantly shifting, potential threats from abroad. Henry wanted to make it clear, you challenge him, you face the consequences.
No messing around.
No.
And then, of course, there's, well, you can't talk about Henry without mentioning the wives.
The wives, right.
And it all starts with Catherine of Aragon, his brother's widow.
Right.
Can you imagine the family dinners?
Yeah, that's one way to put it. It was definitely a strategic alliance meant to strengthen those ties with Spain.
Of course.
But it sets the stage for some of the most dramatic events in Henry's reign.
And speaking of drama, wasn't there also this constant threat of war with France?
Oh, absolutely. Always looming in the background.
And that brings us to, what was it called? The Field of the Cloth of Gold.
Yes. The Field of the Cloth of Gold.
It sounds more like a picnic than a battlefield. It wasn't just about, showing off fancy tents and who had the better hat, was it?
No, not at all. I mean, it was a spectacle, for sure. A display of wealth and power intended to, intimidate rivals and solidify England's position in Europe.
So high-stakes chess, but with really fancy pawns.
Exactly. But beneath the surface, there were all these simmering tensions. And then, to make things even more complicated, Catherine of Aragon's nephew, Charles V, becomes the Holy Roman Emperor.
Oh, boy. So now family ties are getting mixed up with international politics.
Exactly. And it all kind of comes to a head as Henry gets more and more desperate for a male heir. He starts to wonder, is Catherine
Is she the problem?
the right woman to secure my legacy? And well, let's just say his eye starts to wander. And this is where things get really, really interesting.
Juicier than a plum pudding, you mean?
Way juicier. See, we hear about Henry's 6 wives, right? But it's bigger than that. It's about power, legacy. In those days, a male heir wasn't just about continuing the family line.
It was about who actually got to sit on the throne.
Exactly. It was about stability, preventing civil war, looking strong to those rival nations, always sniffing around for weakness. And Henry was obsessed with projecting that image of strength.
Right, so it's not just some royal soap opera. It was a matter of national security. And this is where Anne Boleyn comes in, right?
Anne Boleyn, she wasn't just another lady-in-waiting, let me tell you.
Because she was, what, intelligent? Ambitious?
Oh, both. Sharp as a tack. And this is where it gets really spicy. She was Protestant-leaning.
Oh, no, that's interesting, because England at the time was...
Catholic. Very Catholic.
Very Catholic, yeah. So she's kind of a rebel then.
You could say that. And her influence, well, it went way beyond just, catching Henry's eye. She was part of this whole group pushing for religious change. Imagine the whispers in the corridors of power.
People terrified of losing their position, their influence.
Exactly. So Henry pushing for an annulment from Catherine of Aragon, it wasn't just about getting out of a marriage.
It was a direct challenge to the Pope.
Exactly. And to the entire Catholic Church, which at the time was pretty much like,
Earth-shattering.
earth-shattering. It's like challenging the sun to a staring contest.
And, well, we know how it ends for Anne.
Tragically, yes. She became another casualty of Henry's ambition.
A stark reminder of the stakes of the game. But even though her story ended tragically, Henry still went ahead with the whole English Reformation thing.
He did. He appointed himself the supreme head of the Church of England. Imagine that.
Bold move. Talk about a power grab. But what about the monasteries? I mean, he didn't just. He dissolved them. Gone. Poof.
Gone. Well, not poof. The wealth, the land, it all went straight to the crown, or, to Henry's allies.
Handy.
Very. And we're not just talking about a few small abbeys either. These were wealthy, powerful institutions that had stood for centuries.
Right. Right. So not just about love then, was it? This is about
Power.
cold, hard power.
Exactly. He needed to fund his ambitions, building up the navy, strengthening defenses, always with an eye on those rivals across the channel.
So he was a warrior king as well.
He'd like to think so, yes.
But, 6 wives. Executing some of them. That's not just...
Ruthless.
Well, yes. Was there an element of paranoia there, do you think?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Was it insecurity, a desperate need to secure his legacy, or maybe all of the above?
We only get glimpses of the real Henry, don't we?
Exactly. The passion he felt for Anne Boleyn, the grief when Jane Seymour died, the rage that led to Catherine Howard's execution.
And then there's Catherine Parr, the survivor. How did she manage to outlive Henry?
Catherine Parr. Smart as a whip, that one. Politically savvy, too. She even embraced religious scholarship, published her own writings, which, let me tell you...
For a woman in those times?
Almost unheard of. Can you imagine navigating that court full of whispers and plots, with Henry liable to fly off the handle at any moment?
She must have been playing 4D chess while everyone else was struggling with checkers.
Right. She was a survivor. But let's talk about Ireland. Henry went from being Lord of Ireland to King of Ireland.
Ah, yes. Another part of the kingdom to rule. Why was Ireland so important to him?
It was both opportunity and challenge, you see. He saw himself as the rightful ruler, of course. But Ireland, it had its own tradition, its own religious divisions, powerful families.
Not exactly easy to control then.
Let's just say it wasn't a simple walk in the park. And remember, it wasn't just about conquering territory. It was about imposing a whole system of governance, a way of life that often clashed with the existing order.
So more than just adding another jewel to the crown.
Exactly. This was about power. Henry's power, that ambition to consolidate his rule at home and abroad, that's Henry in a nutshell. He wasn't content with just inheriting the throne. He wanted to reshape everything, leave a legacy that would echo through the ages.
It's amazing when you lay it all out like that. The wives, the wars, breaking with the church. Henry VIII, he really got around.
He did. And don't forget, he wasn't just a brute forcing his will on everyone. Henry was a master of, self-promotion.
Oh, absolutely. Always putting on a show. And that whole Renaissance man image wasn't just for show, though, was it?
Not entirely, no. He fostered the arts, dabbled in music himself, surrounded himself with all the best artists and thinkers.
So he's what, composing love sonnets one minute and ordering executions the next?
Well, basically. He was a complicated guy, full of these contradictions. But that's what makes him so fascinating to study,
It's funny, though. He was so obsessed with having a son to secure his legacy. But in the end, he had 3 children who all ended up ruling England. Mary, Elizabeth, Edward.
It's true. Talk about a twist of fate. And each of them left their own mark on England, didn't they?
They did. You had Mary trying to turn back the clock on the Reformation.
Right, back to Catholicism.
Then Elizabeth steering England through those tricky political waters. It's really quite something.
It really is. But it goes to show, I think, that Henry might have been obsessed with a son, but it was his daughters who really defined the Tudors.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about the wives, the wars, the religious drama, the political maneuvering. After all this, what's the one thing we should remember about Henry VIII? What's the takeaway?
I think it's the sheer impact he had on England. You can love him, you can hate him, but you can't deny that this was a king who changed everything.
He really did. A force of nature, like you said. He went from breaking with the church to establishing his own church, dissolving the monasteries, centralizing power.
And it all started with this young king thrust onto the throne, determined to prove himself. It really makes you think about, the power of personality, of ambition.
It reminds us that history isn't just dates and names in a textbook. It's about real people making real choices, often with huge consequences.
Exactly. And Henry's story, it's a reminder that those people, those figures we read about, they were flawed, complex, just as human as you and me.
Well said. I think that's a good place to leave it for today. So the next time you see a portrait of Henry VIII with that scowl and that fancy hat, remember, there was a lot more to this king than meets the eye.
A lot more. And thankfully for us, a lot of juicy history to dig into.
Absolutely. You certainly kept things interesting. That's it for our deep dive into the reign of Henry VIII. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for more fascinating historical explorations.